Dr. Gad Saad has been a professor for 31 years, and I pulled out a quote from him to describe him better than I can. Being an academic is inscribed in my DNA. To be able to create and disseminate new knowledge is the most noble of all pursuits. To properly do so requires that truth and freedom be defended as inviolable ideas. Otherwise, if one is constrained in what they can study or communicate, then academia ceases to be about truth. 5 years ago, he published an international bestseller called The Parasitic Mind: How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. And he made the case that in the same way that parasites can destroy a host in any organism, a similar thing happens with ideology. Here's what he called it. He called these idea pathogens, and they include, but are not limited to, postmodernism, social constructivism, radical feminism, and cultural relativism, all of which stem from the academic ecosystem. And now we're grateful that he followed up that book with his new one, which is called Suicidal Empathy, which further examines the descent to madness by highlighting the inability to make the right decisions when our emotional system is tricked into a hyperactive form of empathy deployed on the wrong targets. The list is, why do so many people hate us?
Right. So I'll answer this in 4 different ways. So there are 3 main sources of Jew hatred. There is the neo-Nazi types. The Jews won't replace us, the right-wing folks. There is the academic left. Jews are white colonialists who are imperially conquering the noble, peaceful Palestinians. And then there's, of course, Islamic Jew hatred. But I'd like to add a 4th one, which is very much based in sort of my psychological training. So there's a concept in psychology called the self-serving bias, which goes as follows. People tend to attribute successes internally and failures externally. So if I did really well on the exam, well, it's because I'm smart and because I studied hard. If I did poorly on the exam, well, Professor Saad is an obnoxious, unfair Jew, right? And that protects people because all good things come from me and all bad things come from the outside. Now imagine if you can have as the ultimate existential culprit the Jew for all of your failures. If it rained today, it's the Jew's fault. If it's sunny today, it's the Jew's fault. If my wife cheated on me, well, it's the Jew who is the pornographer who probably put the idea to cheat. So everything is viewed through the prism of all of my failures due to a very, very readily available outside source called the Jew. Now, I first noticed this growing up in the Middle East, in Lebanon. Now, Lebanon used to be the progressive place, the Paris of the Middle East. But rest assured, everything in Lebanon was organized around Jew hatred. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples. When I was 5 years old, Gamal Abdel Nasser died, who was the Egyptian pan-Arabist who was revered by all the Arabs. Well, when he died, there was a procession down my street where they were lamenting that he had just passed away. And this is happening in Lebanon, but he's the Egyptian president. And all I could hear the people screaming was, "Death to Jews, death to Jews." And I turned to my mother, I'm thinking, well, why are they saying death to Jews? Because the Egyptian president passed away. So that's story 1. Story 2, when I was about 8, 9 years old, the teacher asked us to get up and tell the class what we want to be when we grow up. I want to be a soccer player, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse. One kid gets up, he knew I was Jewish, we were kids from when we were in, and he went, "I want to be a Jew killer," to everybody's laughter and raucous applause. So that's the reality that I grew up with. And so a lot of the things that you're now seeing in the West that's taking all of these audience members by surprise is stuff that's called Tuesday for me, going Dr. Gad.
You know, there's a deep irony among the Jew haters where his success is his credit and his failures are externalized. They don't apply that same principle to the Jews because they know that Jews are successful generally. But in the case of the Jews, no, they won't get the credit.
Right.
It's a ironic twist that you see. Because I often say, if you come from Mars, and they give you the summary of the 50 groups in the world, and you give them a quick idea of who the Jews are, the Jews would be the last group of people you'd want to hate, right? And if you just look at what we bring to the world, including in Israel, when you see now the Abraham Accords and everything, these are not lovey-dovey people in the Gulf state. There's some real benefits to being friends with Israel. So there's something that's bewildering, that's illogical about the fact that Jews are so hated, when in fact they ought to be so admired. So my next question to you is, are you seeing a possible shift when the area of the Middle East is going to realize that there's a much bigger benefit to being friends with Israel? You know, in the sense that we have a lot to gain with being friends. Forget the emotional aspect of, you know, we've been told to hate them for 50 years, but is there a possibility?
I mean, I'd like to be optimistic, and there are certainly signs that some of the Gulf states are warming up to Israel, so that's nice. But I think over the long term, the only way you're going to get rid of Jew hatred is when kids coming straight out of the womb are no longer taught to hate the Jew. It really is difficult for the Western mind to understand how the entire societies in the Middle East are organized in their DNA around Jew hatred. And so it'll take a complete shift in how you define yourself contra the Jew for that to happen. So inshallah, as we say, but I'm not fully optimistic.
Yeah, I hear you. So,
By the way, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
You were saying about how much we should be appreciated. I actually posted it recently, and I thought it was being an Islamophobe. So the Nobel Foundation that keeps track of all the Nobel Prizes came up with a figure. So I just took a screenshot of the figure. So there was no editorializing from my part. 189 Nobel Prizes have been won by Jews in physics, chemistry, medicine, and economics. And Jews make up 1.2% of the world's population. Muslims make up 1/4 of the world's population. They have 4 Nobel Prizes. Well, when I posted that, nobody said, wow, congratulations, you. It was exactly to your point. This proves that the Nobel committees are run by Zionists.
conspiracy. Right. So I just came back from New York. My daughter graduated at NYU. And this is thousands of people in Yankee Stadium. It's so festive, you have no idea. Right? And of course, in the corner, you see this group. It's genocide. You can see genocide. And it struck me how pathetic it was. Not just evil or wrong. It was something kind of pathetic. And I wonder if, with time, that the idea of being like pro-Hamas and college campuses, you know, when I grew up, you know, the cool kids were not going to be pro-Hamas. The cool kids are not going to try to shut you up. I'm just wondering if becoming a Zionist on campuses may become the cool thing. Because there's something so unfair about being pro-Palestinians today, because it's the safe choice. If most of the academy are pro-Palestinian, if that's the kind of the mainstream bias, I asked you this because I know you have a deep appreciation for humor, for going circuitously towards argument. Is there anything there, or am I being overly Sephardic optimistic?
The latter.
Yeah.
Look, my home university, for the audience members who don't know this, is Concordia University. By the standards of what you're seeing in terms of Jew hatred on American campuses, Concordia is miles ahead. So since the early 2000s, Concordia has been referred to as Gaza University. And so based on the ecosystem that I inhabit, I regrettably can't share your offer.
Right, but we can't make fun of them.
I make fun of them all day long on social media. That's why
I do the same in my columns. I call them conformist and so forth. But, you know, I saw this incredible image this morning. The coolest guy in Hollywood, by far, for 2 decades. You ask anyone, Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, right.
He's as cool as they come, and he's kept it.
And he's a Zionist.
No, he's Zionist. He came to the Khan festival this morning with his gorgeous Israeli wife, who had a ribbon for the hostages. So there is this other kind of strain that has been submerged. And that strain has been the love affair between the Jews and America, right? That's been completely submerged by the noise that are made by so much of the Jew hatred. I want to jump to something bigger, which is, and you've written a lot about that, the threat to the West, right? And I'm particularly interested to see what role the Jews can play, because you, like Douglas Murray and many others, have articulated those Western ideals are really under siege right now. So number one, how big is the threat? And number two, do you see the Jews playing a possible role so that instead of just defending ourselves, we're going to take a bigger role and defend the West?
So there's a term that I use for Jews who don't share some of the alarm that Douglas Murray and I repeatedly share with the world. I call them wood cricket Jews. And the reason why I call them wood cricket Jews is related to the parasitic mind. So the wood cricket is an animal, it's an insect that detests water, right? But when it is parasitized by a hairworm, the hairworm needs the wood cricket to jump in the water in order to complete its reproductive cycle. So once that wood cricket is parasitized, it happily jumps and commits suicide in the service of the hairworm. And so guys like Glenn Greenwald, I don't know if you know, the journalist, Gavor Mate, I don't know if you know who that is. So these are what I call wood crickets. So some of the guys that caused me the greatest amount of angst are fellow Jews who are the queers for Palestine, foie gras, geese for foie gras, chickens for KFC. And so that frustrates me because they should be at the forefront of recognizing the problem, yet they are standing in line with the pro-Hamas kafia guys. And so I think the audience here probably understands the difficulties, but believe me, I know a lot of super progressive Jews that are exactly the opposite to what you and I might think.
Oh, absolutely. Do you find sometimes where a virtue, it's almost like a gluttony,
Yes.
where you take one virtue and it becomes a kind of fetish? So it starts with a good point, which is self-criticism. There's always been a healthy thing for values. But if you take it so far, it becomes a fetish, you end up bumping away all these other virtues.
I mean,
that's how you end up.
That's the whole idea behind suicidal empathy, right? Empathy is a wonderful and noble virtue, right? We are a social species. It makes sense for us to be empathetic. It makes sense for me to have theory of mind, meaning to put myself in your mind when I'm interacting with you. But like Aristotle explained to us several thousand years ago, everything in the right amount, at the right place, at the right target, right? The golden mean. And so what starts off as a laudable thing, empathy, becomes suicidal when you are standing, queers for Palestine.
It's so interesting that you made a distinction. When I asked a few minutes ago whether the Jews can play a role in saving the West, you made important distinctions within the Jews, yes? So now I'll make a distinction as well. Jews like you and I, and many people here, in this room, the Jews who have not fallen into the madness of the insanity and the parasitic mind, the Jews who are still in the same world. Can we play a role in helping save the West?
So in chapter 8 of the parasitic mind, I have a battle cry that has now become really quite viral. Activate your inner honey badger. And the honey badger, for the audience members who may not know this, has been ranked as the fiercest, most ferocious animal in the animal kingdom. It's the size of a small dog, and yet adult lions will stay clear of it because it's so ferocious. So when I tell people activate your inner honey badger, I don't mean for them to be violent, but I mean stand tall and defend these foundational principles. Regrettably, many of the Jews that share our views are complicit through their silence. So they will send me an email, "Dear Professor Saad," a bunch of compliments, and then the last line is, "If you decide to read this email on your show, please don't mention my name." And then I'll write back and say, "Dear Mr. Silverberg, Don't you think that the last line is precisely why we are in this problem? So even the Jews that have their ideological compass quite well calibrated will typically diffuse the responsibility onto others. And that has to stop. Everybody has a voice. Not everybody is a professor. Not everybody has a big show. Not everybody is a well-known journalist. But you can all affect change within the ecosystem of your life. Just get up and talk.
One of the big controversies in the Jewish world that's...
Oh, there you go. Next one, we want to stand over.
One of the big controversies today is whether we've invested too much money in Holocaust education. I'm talking billions. If you add up all the Holocaust we have across the country, it's extraordinary how much emphasis is put on Holocaust education. I'm wondering, from your vantage point as a scholar of human behavior, how do you see a diminishing return? Do you see value in teaching the Holocaust, which is really the ultimate, extraordinary example of being victims, right? So when you see Jew haters today that can't stomach or can't even conceive of the idea of Jews as victims when they see how much success we have, can it backfire? Too much emphasis on the Holocaust?
So I can't speak to whether we're doing too much Holocaust education or not. But what I can tell you is I could spend this money in slightly different ways. Yes, we should always never forget. We should always know what our history looks like. I talk about my tragic history in Lebanon. The number one biggest threat to Jews in the West are the demographic trends that are taking place. The old maxim, demography is destiny, is really true. So for example, if you let in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people into the society, into Western society, where the people that are coming in have, according to Pew Research, so Pew Survey is a non-partisan, probably slightly leftist, very reputable organization. When you poll people from Islamic countries, between 95 to 99% of the people polled exhibit Jew hatred. So do you need a fancy professor to tell you that if you let in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people stemming from those societies, are you going to have an increase or a decrease in Jew hatred? So for example, in Montreal, for the past 4 or 5 years, I have seen a breathtaking speed at which the Islamization of Montreal has happened. Until 1998, so we moved to Montreal in 1975, first year of the Civil War. From 1975 to 1998, I saw a single woman in a hijab. From 1998 to today, I could walk out of my house, out of the first 10 women I see, 5 are hijab. Now, can I put it all together and predict whether that's going to result in an increase or decrease in Jew hatred? So the biggest existential threat to Jews in the West is to let in people who absolutely despise the existence of the Jew. Now, does that mean that every Muslim is nasty and mean? Of course not. I know more nice Muslims than most people this world will ever meet. But Islam, is it compatible with the foundational deontological principles of the West? Absolutely not. The quicker that the West realizes this, the safer the Jews will be.
Another big controversy is how do you do it? The smartest way to counter the hate. I mean, one classic approach is, and I see all the emails and all the fundraisers to do that. Hundreds of millions of dollars are invested in the cliche, we can't remain silent, so we stand up and fight and fight and fight. We have the truth on our side, and, we know where that's going. I'm wondering, there's another, maybe it connects to your honey badger approach, where instead of honoring them so much, because anytime you counter them, you're kind of recognizing their presence, and you run the risk of accentuating their very agenda. And I'm wondering if there's another approach. The most successful organization in Jewish history by far has never done a demonstration against anti-Semitism. It's our friends Chabad, where you go with 25. Yeah, right. They've never done it. I'm not saying that's the only way,
But I'm saying, is there a piece of learning there, which is that if we live as proud Jews, and if we don't show that they have the power to make us go hysterical, to make us afraid, is there anything there from your vantage point as a deep scholar?
Be a honey badger. I mean, really,
Yeah.
right? I'm not a tall man, but I'm the tallest of men, right? I walk proudly. I walk as a proud Jew. No one's going to intimidate me. No one's going to stop me from. And by the way, I exist in the most parasitized ecosystem that could ever be. It's called academia. I mean, try to say something nice about Donald Trump in academia.
Good luck.
That might be even more scary than to criticize Islam, right? And yet, I don't care, right? I just go like this and I move on. And luckily, I can end up in speaking to people.
Place. I met these students the other day, and they came up with this idea. Anytime there's a demonstration against Jews or Israel on their campus, they do a pop-up party with Tel Aviv kind of very cool music, and they dance and they party. That is their response. I want to do a major shift. God, just take full advantage of the fact that you're here. Something that's been really wearing on me is a crisis of isolation right now that's happening in America. Millions of people, since the days of COVID and the lockdowns, have been in deep physical isolation. And it's gotten to the point where it's been, it influences rates of depression. The perfect storm of the lockdowns, social media, the fact that you can have everything delivered now to your house, it's really created a new kind of country where we've lost this ability to get together in real time, and it's only going to get worse with time. I'm just wondering, because I didn't prepare you for this question, I'm just wondering, from your deep knowledge of consumer behavior, where does this go?
So in the happiness book, towards the end of the book, I talk about some research out of Harvard, the longest longitudinal study over the past.
I love that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you know what is the biggest predictor of longevity? It's the quality of your personal relationships.
Yes.
Much more so than your LDL cholesterol scores when you're 50 or 60. And so there is a real physiological downstream effect to being isolated. And by the way, it's easy for me to oftentimes be isolated because I go into my cave, I'm writing a book, and so I'm gone for the next 8 hours. But then I come out to go sit at a cafe, to interact with people. People come up to me and recognize me. And that little moment of 3-4 minutes of humanity, it invigorates you. And so you have to do the effort to foster those relationships.
You do. And we have the greatest gift to humanity, which is called Friday Night Shabbat.
That's true.
It gives us a weekly mechanism that guarantees that we're going to...
Can I interrupt you?
Please do.
I won't point to where my daughter and son is. This is precisely why when they come to me saying they want to go see a friend that night, I say, no, it's Shabbat. So you just proven my point. Thank you very much.
Well, we're both Sephardic Jews. And I was raised exactly the same way you said. We always, even the least religious Sephardic Jews will have Friday Night Shabbat with their parents. And there's so much that we have to contribute to the world. My last point is in the spirit of looking down the road at things that really scare me, is I have never in my life encountered a subject that has taken over humanity so quickly and so ubiquitously. I was at the Milken Conference 2 weeks ago, and it was the number one subject. Those two dreaded words that have peril and promise: artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And I'm sure you've given it some thought, but it's just crazy, the stuff that I'm reading. They replace girlfriends, not just replace jobs, but they're going to be thinking for us, not just writing for us. So, but at the same time, I've heard wonderful stories of a man who was married to a woman for 60 years, and he was desperate to read her a beautiful poem right before she died, but he's a terrible writer. And this is in India, and his granddaughter is an expert in AI. She asked him some prompts, and she came up with a beautiful poem in his words, right? So there is this promise, but there's a lot more peril that I see ahead of us. Please share your thoughts.
Good question. So my undergrad is in mathematics and computer science. So I studied AI well before it was cool to study AI. So I studied it in 1985 with one of the pioneers of Deep Blue. Deep Blue was the early generation of
IBM.
With IBM, where they were trying to program computers to beat the grandmasters in chess. My professor at the time, his name was Monty Newborn. And so I saw the magic of AI back then. And even when I was trying to decide what I would end up pursuing for my PhD, one of the possible topics was to apply AI to study psychology of decision making. And so AI has been on my mind well before it was sort of taken over the world. Look, I think that there are both, as you said, great promises, medical diagnostics, right? I mean, now you could put in your fMRI into Grok and it could recognize what it is before any physician can. So there are definitely pattern recognition opportunities that AI can afford. I do worry, though, that some of the things that makes us human, our creativity in struggling to come up with the right poetic words to the woman that we love, I find it a bit regrettable that then gets subcontracted to a super AI. So I hope that we don't lose some of our humanity in that, although I don't think that the mean robots are going to take over the world.
Yeah, and I think part of the humanity is we're fallible. We make mistakes. I don't want to lose that.
Of course.
Indeed,
yeah.
So talk to me about your Jewish life. I know that there are lots of Ashkenazi Jews in Montreal. I spent 20 years in Montreal. I'm curious of your Jewish life in Montreal.
So you keep using the term Sephardic. I prefer to use Mizrahi, right? So the Mizrahi Jews, for those of you who don't know, it's the Iraqi Jews, the Lebanese Jews, the Egyptian.
Broader term.
Yeah, right. and especially from Arabic-speaking countries.
Right.
And so I really live what I consider to be a very exotic version of Judaism, which is, I remember the first time that I went to Israel, when I would break out the Arabic, my mother tongue is Arabic. To most of the Israelis, that was so exotic. To me, it was natural. We were Jews that happened to live in an Arabic-speaking country. And so, as you said, we were talking backstage, I come from an Orthodox synagogue, Spanish-Portuguese in Montreal. We did all the Shabbat. We had, kept kosher at home. But I don't necessarily light the candles at 4:21, and if I light them at 4:22, bad things are going.
There's a Chabad rabbi.
I know. I don't want to offend anybody. I've lived my Judaism in very profound ways. I escaped execution because I'm Jewish. I stand up very tall and take great death threats in order to defend the Jewish cause. So while I am very Jewish in my identity, I don't necessarily put all of the practices of Judaism. Although, speaking of Chabad, so I did my PhD at Cornell, and the Chabad rabbi there became a very good friend of mine, Rabbi Eli Silberstein. Oh, some people know him. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's one friend.
So Rabbi Eli, as he realized that my time at Cornell was ending, he approached me, and you always have to recognize that there's going to be some ask. And so he said, "Can I ask you something, Gad? Can you do me a favor?" I said, "What is it, Rabbi?" He goes, "You have a very pure Jewish soul." This is 1994. He said, Can I get you to make me a promise that you will put tefillin every day for me?" And I said, yes. And from 1994 to 2005, I put on the tefillin every day.
Amazing. Wow.
Now, you could ask me, why did I stop in 2005? But you're too polite a host to do so.
No. One of the things about Montreal that's really interesting is Mizrahi Jews really became major. I was one of the first, my family was one of the first in the early 60s, and then over the next 10 to 15 years, it's now up to 30 to 40,000 are Mizrahi Jews, most of them from Morocco, but also many from Lebanon. And one of the things that's interesting is that they've been really more and more involved with the leadership of the community.
True.
So you have Mizrahi Jews at the head of the Federation and United Jewish Appeal, lots of intermarriage
Right.
between Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews. And it's something that we don't really see too much of in America, but it's starting to happen. So maybe you can talk about the integration of different Jews in
Montreal.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said. There's quite a bit of crossover. But the funny thing is, so there's the audience might not know this, but there's a neighborhood of Montreal, Outremont, which is where all the Hasidic Jews live.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting when you talk about intermarriage, now within the ultra-Orthodox communities, you have different sects. Some of them that wear the white socks.
Right.
They're from Hungarian versus Polish. And what's funny about the psychology of tribalism, that even within these ultra-Orthodox communities, there is a schism between, I would never allow my daughter to marry one of those guys over there.
Yeah.
And so it shows you the power of coalitional psychology to view the world as us versus them.
Yes, yes. Even in the Mizrahi world, the Syrians in deal.
Exactly.
For many years, if you marry a Lebanese, watch out.
That's true.
All right, I want to end on one point. I know that great authors are always thinking of their next book. So whatever you can divulge, what are you thinking?
Well, so I'm currently working on suicidal empathy, which is basically the idea that, as I said earlier, empathy is great, but it can become suicidal when it targets the wrong people and it becomes hyperactive. So MS-13 gang members deserve more empathy than American vets who've lost limbs. That's not a good thing. The felon deserves more empathy than the woman that he raped. That's not a good thing. And so what I demonstrate in this book is that many of our domestic and foreign failures in terms of the policies stem from this misfiring of empathy. The next book I'm thinking of doing, and don't hold me to it, it's just ça mijote, you say in French. It's simmering in my head, is to demonstrate the power of evolutionary thinking. So my day job as a professor is to be an evolutionary psychologist, right? I apply evolutionary theory to study consumer behavior, to study economic behavior. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is writing a book on the power of using evolution in fields that you wouldn't typically think of. And let me give you one example. There's a field called Darwinian literary criticism, which basically means you study famous literature through a Darwinian lens. The idea being that the type of literature that moves us is a few key themes that are universal throughout time and place. It's about sibling rivalry. It's about paternity uncertainty. It's about parent-offspring conflict. Those themes resonate with us. I can listen to an ancient Greek poem and exactly understand what he's saying because the software running his brain is exactly the same as the software running mine, even though he doesn't know what an iPad is or what an Uber is. And so one of the next books I'm thinking of writing is to demonstrate the ubiquity of evolution in many, many different disciplines.
Wow. Did anybody understand that? Yeah. No, I did. I want to make sure we're not going to go over. The issue of evolution and empathy, the thing that I really liked is that you're starting with something that everybody could agree with, which is empathy is a good thing. Virtue is a good thing. And I wonder, how do you gauge whether you're making an impact to the national conversation or not? Because it's a huge thought. Right. The idea that we go crazy on one virtue. How do you gauge whether you're influencing the national conversation? I say that because I'm wishing that you are.
I don't know how to answer that without appearing immodest. When Elon Musk says you're his favorite thinker, then maybe
Oh, well, that's a great start. That's a great start because you're up against this force of gravity where people have stopped thinking and they just become automatons and it's groupthink. And it's really kind of alarming in a way, where, we've lost this search for truth on college campuses and you go with predisposed, views. And how do you crack through that? There's a new university that started in Texas.
Yes, University of Austin.
Yes,
I
yes,
just spoke there 2-3 months ago.
Right. It's wonderful. And the whole idea is to bring back this fearless search for truth. It's as if the truth itself has become an enemy.
Right. And the reason for that, by the way, earlier you mentioned postmodernism. Postmodernism is the most parasitic of all ideas because it purports that there is no objective truth. And it's precisely that allows everything to be up is down, left is right, women are men. If there is no objective truth, then it's complete nihilism. It's complete intellectual terrorism. And so with my small voice, I hope to turn that around.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, God, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I want to say one word about Matisyahu. Many years ago, he played in a concert in Spain. And in the audience were Palestinians who were hoping to destroy his concert, and they were waving these huge flags. And I said this to him once, and he sang the song Jerusalem, and it gave me the goosebumps. So we're so honored to have such a proud Jew with us tonight, Matisyahu.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Rabbi of the Young Israel North Beverly Hills Synagogue, Rabbi Penny Dunner.